We all know that Game of Thrones fell off a cliff in its last 2 seasons, but since everyone's already made a video about that, instead, I want to focus on a specific aspect of those 2 seasons that I feel show how lame the series became, and that is Daenerys Targaryen's invasion of Westeros. Not only was her rise to power not through any hard work or ingenuity of her own, but the writers felt that the only way they could invent a conflict out of easy claims of fame was by putting in challenges to her rule that made no sense. Let's get this clear. Daenerys is a bum who by the last season does little to inspire any reason among her subjects to actually accept her rule. Despite this, she somehow managed to be the most likable female ruler in the series up until she went all genocidal on the townspeople. But let's keep it a stack. Most of those niggas were on the list for one thing or another. I ain't forget how they treated the man who exposed their king as a fraud, or the man who saved the city while said fraud king was pissing in the corner. We have a right to stand upon those subhumans and not really care if they get torched. Daenerys, on the other hand, is literally supposed to protect them based on a mandate she inherited from her dumbass father, who was even more genocidal than her. But before we get into that, let's take it back to the beginning of her arc. Daenerys starts the series like how she ends it, with no accomplishments to call her own. She was born into a royal family. Her land pirates army was first given as a result of a marriage that her brother arranged. The slave army was given to her because she scammed a Bumazil with her dragon, and most importantly, said dragon she has, along with the other 2, aka the biggest reason she could have and ended up winning the war, was a gift from a third party that once again was only given to her because of who her father was. While you could say that both losers were part of her clique because she proved herself, but 1, I'll go into more detail as to why they shouldn't exist later, and 2, I think a bigger reason why they followed her has to do with the fact that she took out their leadership. There's nothing wrong with only having what you have because of how you were born in the context of the story. It clearly takes place in an era where nobility actually mattered, and if you weren't born with land, then you might as well blow the next man who was. In fact, most of the characters in the show are only really where they are because of handouts and their birth status. But the difference between everyone else and Daenerys is that they're not trying to have it both ways. They know they come from powerful families, and they don't care because that's how life is. Daenerys wants to claim leadership based on the fact that her father was the last king, even though he himself broke the terms of service for the Westeros app, so that people don't have much of a reason to want or like her. But despite stressing that she's a rightful queen by blood, she also seems to believe that her hard work took her from the lame depths of poverty she was in and gave her an army, when that is literally not facts at all.
I have been sold like a brood mare. I've been shamed and betrayed. Do you know what kept me standing through all those years in exile? Faith in myself. In Daenerys Targaryen.
The vast majority of her gains came from people dick riding because of who she was and her dragons, which themselves came from someone dick riding her because of who she was. Of the 3 major plot points in the show, before the convergence in season 7, my least favorite was the Essos one, so I'm not really gonna go over Daniel's story in detail. Just know that she ended up taking over a city, ran it poorly, then abandoned it to go rule some kingdom she never even stepped foot in. While in most circumstances, Daenerys going to be welcome in Westeros, it just so happened that the queen at the time was an even bigger waste of space than her. Not only that, but her claims to the throne was even less strong than Daenerys's. To make things even more lopsided, the last few seasons consisted of alienating people who stood between her being a queen and her being a pack. So the largest army in the kingdom was on Daenerys' side, plus the southern coast of the kingdom, plus some sea pirate losers who weren't quite as worthless as their uncle. So with Cersei being an unpopular queen, faced with a war against a woman with basically a Mongol horde, an at least undefeated slave army, the largest army from her own continent, and the Middle Ages equivalent of a nuclear weapon, all while only having the support of 2 of the 7 kingdoms, you would think she would just decide to fuck off like anybody with common sense. Or alternatively, you would think that the war would last 20 minutes before there's a new coronation ceremony, and if you thought that, you would not have been alone, neither among the viewers of the show or the characters themselves. But to subvert your expectations and suspense of disbelief, D&D decides to do a magic trick by pulling contrived reasons to stall Daenerys out of their assholes. Now the initial plan was reasonable enough. Tyrion didn't want to kill the ungrateful waste-skins that he used to live with, so he didn't want dragons in the capital, and he also didn't want the people to think that they were being invaded by foreign infidels, so he decided to have the Reach and the Dornishmen siege King's Landing, while the Dothraki and the Unsullied take out the Lannisters in their homeland. Now under well-written storylines, this plan would work just fine, but the universe just randomly decided that it hated Daenerys or something, and asked pulls away most of her allies in Westeros in 2 short moves that are as lame as they are nonsensical. So Dorne Lady and the Sand Bums were sent with Yara and Arik to consolidate their armies in preparation for the siege. Why? And it's not like Dorne is especially known for its fleets, and it's not like having 2/3 of the houses pledged to you at the same place at the same time could do anything except give the Ups a perfect opportunity to get rid of 2 problems at once, which is exactly what happened. So Yara and Euron have this Simba Scar thing going on, and it just so happens that his fleet is like a million times bigger than hers. You know, I'm not really mad at it. After all, he is a bloodthirsty subhuman warlord, so I'm not surprised most of the Iron comes sided with him over the relative softy Yara. What I am surprised by is the fact that this one naval engagement was enough to take Dorne out of the war. The only people captured were the Sand Op and their dad's girlfriend. What does that have to do with the actual Dornish army? Compare and contrast when most of the Rifle King Stannis' fleet got blown up by wildfire, and then most of the survivors were digged down by Tywin the Dawn, yet Stannis still had the means to hold the wildlings and challenge the North. I mean, he lost, but that was more due to cunning and trickery than him being completely dominated. To make this dumber, the characters even mentioned there was a new Prince of Dorne that pledges support to Daenerys.
The new Prince of Dorne pledges his support.
No matter how many lords turn against her, as long as she sits on the Iron Throne, she can call herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms.
With the news of his family captured by Euron, you would think that would push him to want to fight Cersei even more, but nah, he just isn't shown or mentioned again for the rest of the show until like the series finale, where he says and does nothing. But even with the Dornish and Ironborn gone, Daenerys still has more Westeros men on her side than Cersei. The region is like the most populated at the time of the season, the most wealthy kingdom in the continent. But having the support of the Tyrells, or whatever's left of them, Daenerys has Cersei far outnumbered. Let's look at what the other kingdoms are up to. The North and the Vale are pledged to the Rifle King. The Riverlands may be on Cersei's side, but they switch sides every other week, depending on who steps in, so they don't really matter. Also, Daenerys can easily just bully them into joining her, even without the dragons. The Iron Islands are under Cersei, but they've been repeatedly sent home by the other kingdoms. Now the Stormlands are a little iffy, because it feels like the show wants to pretend they don't exist anymore. The Baratheon soldiers all side with either Renly or Stannis, so there's no way they would pick Cersei, the woman who scammed her way into being in power by defrauding the king. But at the same time, Seta King's rebellion was based entirely on opposing Targaryen rule, so I don't see them siding with Daenerys either. I guess they would remain neutral, but if they had to pick a side, it would probably be Daenerys's, out of hatred for the Lannisters, and also dragons exist. So at the end of the day, the only kingdoms that Cersei can really exert her control over are the Crownlands and the Westerlands, where her family stays. And mind you, that's even after Euron asked the withdrawal of the Dorne. Even though the show would have been much better if the winter that came was the series finale, you know, if the Great War was the last war, the writers wanted to prolong the conflict they spent seasons hammering in was supposed to be less important. So they had to find a way for Daenerys to lose the Tyrells, and the option they chose may have solved some of the problems they made, but in show, it made little logical sense. For some reason, Randall Tarly decided to switch sides to Cersei, even though he's pledged to the Tyrells, and the official explanation is that he didn't want to serve a foreign queen with a foreign army, and that by allying with the Lannisters, he could be the new Lord of the Reach in Olenna's place. This solves the problem of the Lannisters being in debt because their mines ran out, because now Randall could just help the Lannisters finesse his own kingdom's resources to pay off debts that he wouldn't have to worry about if he just stayed on the side he was already on. I don't see how this turn actually makes sense to people. I mean, in the books or something, there's some theory about Randall turning on the Tyrells because he supports Fagon the Blackfire, but one, this isn't the books, and two, in that theory, he wouldn't have been alone. The idea that a feudal lord doesn't want to serve a queen because she didn't grow up in a country is something that has little basis in reality. He's not some anti-immigration pundit from a western country. He is a guy who spent most of his life under Targaryen rule anyway. What does it matter if Daenerys didn't spend most of her life in the same country as her subjects, when she'll never meet or talk to them or have to answer to them? This isn't a democracy where anyone is held accountable for their actions. All that matters is Daenerys keeps the other nobles in fear, and with her dragons and personal army, that's not really a problem. Daenerys being queen should still make more sense to him over Cersei, considering his previous alliances. Back when the War of the Five Ops started, he and the rest of the Reach chose Renly, indicating that he didn't think Cersei's kids were Robert's. The only reason he switched was because Renly got put in her shirts, and the Tyrells married into the Lannisters, not because they now see that the Tryhard King's claim was legitimate. With all of Cersei's kids gone, surely one of Robert's cousins somewhere has a kid that can be king or something. Cersei's claims to be the queen can't rest on the fact that she was the mother of the last king, because everyone knows he wasn't a Baratheon. The only reason the fake Baratheons are even allowed to exist is because they were being married to the Tyrells and the Martells, but now nobody who isn't Lannister has anything to gain by Cersei being queen. The point is, Randall should know that Cersei isn't the rightful queen given his past allegiances, but even aside from who he likes more or whatever, it's difficult to believe anyone with common sense would switch sides from the person with 3 dragons to the one with none. There's no way he doesn't know that he'll end up in a shirt if he keeps playing with Daenerys, so why would he switch to the side that has literally no chance of winning the war? But okay, maybe he's just off that Joffrey pack and isn't thinking clearly, but that doesn't change the logistical problem of a single house breaking with the rest of the region and calling it a day. Even if the Tullys wanted to switch sides, there's nothing to suggest the rest of the Reach will join them. Instead, the other houses of the Reach just let the Tullys do their thing, I guess, because it's literally just them and the Lannisters that got murked by the dragon. So even after losing all her Westeros allies through bullshit ass polls after bullshit ass polls, Demicky still manages to have the means to take the throne whenever she wants. That's cool. Not only does she have a massive foreign army, but she quickly wins the support of Jon Snow, and with him the North, Vale, and Riverlands. As we all know, the main plot of the season has to take a detour, because they have to fight the zombies and need Daenerys' army to do so. If you want a brother, nigga, say so. Just to spit in her face afterwards and tell her without words that Jon is the true king, because they like him more. But it also turns out Jon is actually literally the true king, because he's a Targaryen, so now Daenerys came all this way for nothing. But but Dany doesn't have to worry, because not only is Aegon too simped out to do anything to challenge her, but she still has 2 dragons. Oh wait, yet with 1 dragon, she still managed to take the capital, because that's all she really needs to be queen, and the Golden Company was a waste of everyone's time. After destroying the city she was meant to rule from, now she wants to spread the revolution worldwide, despite never indicating once that she was going to do that ever before, and she gets clipped. But one thing that's been bothering me about this whole plan is the existence of the Dothraki. I don't know what she intended by bringing them to Westeros. They're a slaver's society that raises and pillages people they have the means to bully. There's no way Daenerys could let them do that in the 7 Kingdoms, but at the same time, there's too many of them for them all to be granted land after she becomes queen. So the only way for them to exist was to return home. But if that's the case, then why come at all? Did they just want to do Daenerys this one solid for putting their leaders in her blunt, or did Daenerys scam them like she was Ed and Eddie? Either way, they shouldn't have been part of the invasion, and they shouldn't have been born. The Unsullied makes more sense because they're eunuchs, so serving as Daenerys' personal god for life would actually fit them. In the end, Daenerys was always fighting a war she couldn't lose, and no matter how hard and poorly the writers tried to even the playing field, Daenerys' W could never come across illegitimate, so her ring, I mean her crown, doesn't really count if you think about it.